Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I know things have probably been a little bit sporadic lately, but let me give you a quick update of where things are. Phase 1 of the 8.1 swap on Ugly Truck is pretty much done. I've been driving it for the last couple of days. In fact, I got about a whole week of commuting on it. It's got right at 250 miles on the completed swap. Everything's working great, it's powerful, it's torquey, and I love that truck. But today I'm going to be spending a little time on the other truck in the fleet, the 2020 GMC AT4 HD. Now I picked this thing up back in September. It's a brand new truck, the first thing I've ever purchased. It was pretty exciting. Now, I really haven't changed a whole lot on it. I've basically just been driving it every single day, but now it's time for some upgrades, mainly wheels and tires. I went back and forth quite a bit before I finally made up my mind on what type of tire I'm going to be running. My final decision, Cognito trail grapplers in a 35 1250 by 20 with the F load range, so they'll hold a ton of weight.
I don't know how I messed that one up because they're clearly ridge grapplers.
Now, the stock tires that come on the 2020s are just under 35 inches tall. So at first you might think, well, it's not that big of a deal to actually get them to fit on a truck like this. Now, if I was using my stock wheels, I wouldn't have to do a single thing, they would go right on. However, I'm using a 20 by 10 with a negative 24 offset, where the stock wheels are a 20 by 8.5 with a positive offset. So overall, the outside lip of the wheel is probably going to be 2 to 3 inches farther towards the outside. Now, GM trucks have never been very generous with their wheel opening in terms of fitting a larger wheel that sticks out further. So there's a couple things that I'm going to have to do. Number one, as much as I hate to, I'm probably going to have to trim. Just a little bit on this lower mud flap. I'll probably have to trim behind this fender liner to get it to push further back, and then maybe even on this front plastic valance. Now, that's not a huge deal, but I do want to keep it at a minimum. So to do that, I'm going to raise the front end of the truck up with a leveling kit. Now, when I first bought this thing, I actually lowered it down a little bit by about 1.5 inches to 2 inches simply by decranking the torsion bars in the front and installing a John C. Garage drop shackle in the rear, because at the time I was planning on going with more of like a street style look. But because I have Ugly Truck, that's lowered, that's kind of my sport truck, I want to lift this thing up just a touch to kind of give it that aggressive off-road vibe. Now, out back, because I already lowered it, I have the stock shackles that I'm going to be reinstalling, and if later on down the road I still don't have enough height in the back, I have a pair of 1-inch lift blocks, but I'm going to hold off on these for now. Up front, the actual lift is going to be provided by these new torsion bar leveling keys. This is a shock spacer up front, so I can use the stock shock and let it run just a little bit longer position. Now, the upper control arms are kind of what make everything work together. Now, you don't necessarily have to install these, but whenever you have the front of an IFS truck that's raised up a little bit, usually the upper control arms are going to be down kind of towards the droop stops. Now, that'll make for a pretty rough ride because you're basically running near the limits of your suspension travel, limited by the upper stock control arm. And that's where the replacement aftermarket upper control arm comes in, because it's shaped at a little bit different angle to allow for a lot more droop travel, and plus it has an improved ball joint angle, so there won't be any binding at that increased ride height. Now, I'm going to get started out back because, as popular as squatting trucks is, I refuse to let any truck I own squat even just for a moment. So back up first, and then we'll take care of the front. When I was underneath the truck tightening the rear bed bolts, I noticed something that kind of irritated me a little bit. Turns out somebody's backed into this truck at some point. Now, it's a pretty minor ding, not a huge deal, but check this out. If you look at the gap between the bumper and the bed on the driver's side, I've got, I don't know, roughly 2 fingers of space. But when I was underneath on the passenger side tightening up the bed, I did notice there was 2 spots where the paint was chipped. And I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. You see that little spot right there? And there's one a little higher. I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of in there a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. I can't really show that one to you. But anyway, there's 2 chips where you can see that green primer underneath the paint. And I looked around for a little while and I couldn't quite figure it out. But right here on this lower plastic step, there's a nice kind of little round spot where someone probably had a low car and they backed into it. And you can also see on the top of the step, this kind of gap opens up right here on the corner. Not a huge deal. It just is kind of one of those things that irritates you because you know somebody bumped into the car. For it to move that bumper, it's kind of solid. You'd had to have noticed it. It's not like you just accidentally did it, drove away. So, you know, just stuff like that happens. It's irritating to know someone bumped into your car and just drove off and never left a note or anything, but that's all right. It's not a huge deal. Could have been a lot worse, but now it's time to move on to the front and get it a little bit higher up in the air. Now, it's pretty popular with a leveling kit just to buy brand new front shocks, something like a Fox 2.0, Fox 2.5 with an external reservoir. You know, there's some really high dollar shocks that you can throw at the front of your truck. Now, I don't do a whole lot of off-roading. In fact, most of my driving is on the highway, and the stock Ranchos, they do okay for me. So instead of swapping them out for now, all I'm going to do is be installing the supplied spacer, which gives us a little more droop travel. Now, all this really does is just kind of install on the top of the shock here. See if I can do it one-handed. And it just lets the shock pop down by about a ½ an inch or so. So just set that guy right on there and put the shock back into the frame. Now, the only real cutting or modification that we've got to do to this truck is on the service perch, or basically a droop stop, as I like to call it. Now, it's only on one of the pivots of the control arm, in this case, the front. The rear is just kind of all open in there. Now, they give you a template, and basically you trim about a ½ inch above this dotted line and remove a lot of this material here, which allows the upper control arm to droop down a little bit further than it did before. That's the only cutting we got to do. It's fairly minor, and it's really not going to hurt the integrity of the truck at all. So let's get back to it. So all the work that we've done so far on the front end, the different upper control arms and the shock spacers, well, none of that stuff is what actually makes the truck sit higher. It just allows the suspension to operate properly at a raised ride height and provide a little bit more up travel, again, because it's going to be sitting higher. Now, the torsion bar is what is basically the spring on the front end of these HD trucks, and the torsion bar key, this guy right here, is what indexes the torsion bar or twists it to set the ride height at the exact right level. Now, they are adjustable, and you can turn the adjusters in just a little bit to raise the front end up, but you only have so much travel that you can go. So a popular aftermarket modification is to install aftermarket keys that are clocked differently. Kind of here's an idea how they work. This is the lift key and this is the stock key. And at the surface, they kind of look similar, but when you lay the stock key on top of the aftermarket key and you sort of line up the holes in the hex right there, well, you can see on the arm how much different they two are. This one obviously is going to push the bar higher at a same position, and that's where the increased ride height is going to come from. Now, you do need one of these, or it's really recommended that you have one. You can do it without, but a torsion bar installer tool is definitely going to save you a lot of hassles, and it's a much safer way to work on a torsion bar, especially when you're installing a lift key, because it's going to be under a little bit more pressure when you turn everything in, and that'll just save your fingers. So you can rent them sometimes, or you can buy them. I picked this one up on Amazon for I think about 80 bucks, and it'll work for the 2011 and newer trucks as well as some of the older ones. If you've got a tool for the 99 to 07 or 10 or whatever, the tool's not quite wide enough to work on the cross member on the 2011 and up trucks. But anyway, we'll get this installed, and one side of the front end is 100% complete. Well, the suspension's complete and the truck is sitting back on the ground, but the job's not done yet because we need to adjust the ride height. I screwed in the torsion bar adjusters just to some arbitrary height, and right now the front end of the truck is sitting way too high. It's about 2 inches taller than the rear. Now that's not going to work properly because the instructions call for exactly 3 inches of droop travel. When I had the truck still jacked up but the tires on, I took a measurement and I had exactly 11.5 inches from the top of the tire, taking into account the yardstick, to the body line on the fender flare. Now at ride height, I should have, well, 3 less than that, or 8 1/2 inches, but right now I'm at 10 1/2, or 2 inches too high. So all I've got to do is back out the adjuster bolts to lower the front end 2 inches, and that'll actually put it, well, almost dead nuts level with the rear. But more importantly, I now know that I have proper droop travel, so I'm not going to operate the ball joints near their limit, and that won't break anything. So we know we'll be safe. Well, it took a couple of tries, but I've got the suspension at exactly the right ride height. Now, one thing to keep in mind as you're making adjustments to an IFS front end, especially on ride height, you want to make sure you move the truck, say back it up 15 or 20 feet and drive it back forward, just to make sure everything's settled out, because that will change your measurement. On mine, if I measured before driving it and after, it'll settle about 1/2 inch, just because of the way that the tires will bind up as the ride height adjusts. So anyway, I got the ride height nailed with exactly 3 inches of droop travel, and on this truck, 3 inches of droop travel also basically means it has a perfectly level ride height, front to back within a 1/16 of an inch. So I couldn't be happier with how the leveling kit installation turned out. Now, one thing to keep in mind, it's very, very close, is how tall your garage doors are. Now, this truck has got these little antenna things and these little, I don't know, cab lights or whatever up on the roof. And without any exaggeration, I have exactly 1/2 inch of clearance between the top of that little antenna and the bottom of the garage door. And that's with the stock tires on. So I might need to put the larger tires on outside. I know they're probably within a 1/2 inch diameter taller, so I might be able to like just barely squeak by. But if you've got a shorter garage, just kind of pay attention to that. Now, I want to say thank you guys for watching, and if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, because I've got some great content coming for both the 2020 AT4 and the ugly truck, the 2000 Silverado, that I just finished up swapping an 8.1 under the hood. Now, I've got something that's in the works. It'll probably take a few more weeks to materialize, but it's something big, and I think you guys are going to love it, because it's going to make that truck handle and drive, well, totally different from what it does now, and it'll make it probably one of a kind. But like I said, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. But now it's time for some tires on the AT4. Check them out. Remember, they're 35, 12, 50, 20 ridge grapplers, and the wheels, they're pretty cool too. Let me show you.